Thank you for joining us. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that this event will be video recorded, and the audience should turn off their camera and microphone during the event. And if you have any questions, you can put it into the chat function, and we will go through it at the end. Now I will share my screen. I would like to first provide a little context for today's event. Today's topic will focus on accessibility in cultural venues for blind and partially sighted visitors. Because of the current COVID-19 pandemic, museums are facing unprecedented challenges in delivering accessibility service while keeping visitors safe at the venue. I am Xi Wang, a researcher at Queen's University Belfast. I am your host and also one of the speakers at today's event. For the benefit of our blind and partially sighted members of the audience today, I am a 28-year-old woman with long black hair and wear a pair of golden round glasses. I'm in blue-white sweater and a pair of golden earrings. We have 5 guest speakers joining us today. Sarah McDonough is a researcher at Queen's, and she's leading an ESRC-funded project in accessibility. Olive Rogers is from the Royal National Institute of Blind People. She's a community access worker. We also have 2 blind and partially sighted speakers joining us today, Gary Smith and Tori Tennant. Unfortunately, Freddie Young is not feeling well this morning and cannot join us today. So today's event has 3 parts. Firstly, we will do a short interactive poll with our audience. Then we will have a talk session. 3 speakers will introduce their research projects or current practice. They will outline how their findings will enhance social inclusion and visitor experience for blind and partially sighted visitors. Finally, we will have a roundtable session with our 2 blind partially sighted speakers to discuss accessibility issues in museums in what is called the new normal. We are interested in finding out what facilities would be helpful for blind and partially sighted visitors when we are able to return to cultural venues in the new normal, and when challenges and difficulties can be expected. At the end, we hope to have some time for a few questions from the audience. First, a short poll. We will use Zoom's raise hand function. If you click on the participants button, you should find a raise hand button on the bottom right corner of your screen. The icon is a blue hand. If you click that blue hand, you will raise your hand. To lower your hand, click the hand icon again, or click on lower your hand. So just to test the process, I would like to ask you a very hard question. Are you awake? Please now raise your blue hands if you are awake. Danny, who is our Zoom master for today, will count how many people have raised their hands. Danny, would you please give the number of people who raised their hands? Okay, now I can see that there are 12 out of 32 people raise their hands who are awake. Please lower your hands now, and we will move to the next question. Thank you. The second question is, could I ask how many of you are blind or partially sighted? Please raise your hand if you would classify yourself as blind or partially sighted. I can see the chat. There are some people cannot find the raise hand function, and I would like to give this instruction again. So if you click on the participants button, you should find a raise hand button on the bottom right corner of your screen. The icon is a blue hand, and if you click that blue hand, you will raise your hand. And to lower your hands, you can either click hand icon again or click on lower your hand. Okay, now we can see that there are 3 blind and partially sighted people raise their hands. Please lower your hands now. We'll move to the next question. The next question is, what is your estimate of how many museums offer audio described guides in the UK? There are 3 options you can choose from. Option A, 30%. Option B, 10%. Option C, 3%. If you would like to choose option A, 30%, please raise your hand now, and I will give you a few seconds, and then you will count the people. Okay, lower your hands now. If you like to choose option B, 10%, please raise your hands now. We are counting the number of votes for option B. Thanks. You can lower your hands now. If your choice is option C, 3%, please raise your hands now. Thanks. You can lower your hands now. Now the result. 1 people choose option A, 30%, and 12 people choose option B, 10%, and 10 people choose option C, 3%. Now I will tell you the right answer. The right answer is option C, 3%. And according to the survey on the state of museum access in 2018, audio described guides were mentioned only 3% of museums. Our final question is this. How many museums in the UK offer Braille resources? The 3 possible answers are A, 90%, B, 50%, C, 10%. If you'd like to choose option A, 90%, please raise your hand now. Okay, please lower your hands now. If your choice is option B, 50%, please raise your hand. Thanks. Please lower your hands now. If your choice is option C, 10%, please raise your hand now. Thanks. Please lower your hands now. Now the results. 2 people choose option A, 90%. 4 people choose option B, 50%. And 16 people choose option C, 10%. And the right answer is option C, 10%. Again, according to survey on the state of museum access in 2018, Braille resources were mentioned by only 10% of museums. Thanks for your help with that short poll. Now we will move to the 3 presentations, and I will start by telling you about my research work. I'm doing a 3-year research project funded by the EU in collaboration with Titanic Belfast and Royal National Institute of Blind People. Titanic Belfast is a world's leading tourist attraction. My project is investigating innovative access options for the blind and partially sighted, and using new technologies within museum environments. I have pioneered 2 technological approaches that combine 2 things. Firstly, we want to be able to produce low-cost accessibility solutions, and we also want to make the visitor experience more emotionally engaging for blind and partially sighted visitors. Firstly, I have developed a smart map of Titanic's fateful maiden voyage. The map is a 3D map, and I use a laser cutting machine to make the countries and to engrave the road taken by the Titanic. And you can see the picture in the middle of this slide. I place the buttons at all the key points on the map. When the user presses a button, it plays the audio description. Using smart software, the user can request more detailed audio description if they want. The smart map uses readily available materials and affordable technologies, such as a Raspberry Pi. This map brings visitors on board Titanic. Visitors are able to use their fingers to trace the voyage route. They can hear typical music of different locations and follow the personal stories of the passengers, narrated using different voices. Evaluation has shown that blind and partially sighted visitors had significant emotional engagement through the smart map. Here are some quotes from the blind and partially sighted visitors. I enjoyed doing it. Using different voice actors and background music was really positive for evoking emotions. In fact, using real-life stories invoked more emotional reactions too. Another participant, a very positive move. It will be a move forward to improve accessibility for visually impaired people, but also for sighted people, as it can help visualize events on one route. Secondly, I've led development of a voice-driven audio description guide for Titanic Belfast. It is a sort of Alexa specifically for Titanic Belfast. This is voice-driven audio description guide uses speech synthesis to generate audio description and speech recognition for input to voice activate the chatbot. The guide gives navigation instructions and visitors can ask questions about Titanic. The guide enables visitors to autonomously enjoy a semi-structured guided tour of the galleries and navigate the venue's facilities. We want to find out how useful such voice-driven audio description guides might be in improving museum accessibility. If all the museum's expert knowledge could be stored in a specific database held by the museum, then our interactive audio guide could make this information accessible via a specialized search engine, which we are developing. This could be a far more accessible and independent way for users to explore the museum. The interface puts the user in control of the dialogue. We have already developed a prototype speech-driven audio guide specifically for Titanic Belfast, and we look forward to evaluating it when circumstances allow. Now, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Sarah McDonough. Sarah, would you like to tell us about the work you have been involved in?
Yes, thank you, Xi, for that introduction. Yes, hello, everyone. My name is Sarah McDonough, and for the blind and partially sighted joining us today, I'm a 28-year-old woman with long brown hair and brown eyes. And I'm wearing a cream jumper, and I have my black headphones on, and behind me here is a bookcase and a lamp as well. So I'd really like to take this opportunity to thank Xi and the organisers for organising this event, which is timely, and I'm really delighted to be a part of it and to be part of this with such fantastic speakers as well, who have real insight into accessibility. So what I'm going to do today is just to introduce my own research and present a little bit of background to it. So I should also mention that this work was carried out with the help of the RNIB, particularly Olive, who's going to speak after me. And some of the participants here today were involved in this research, so I'd like to thank them for their participation. So a little bit of background about the project. This project is really focused on creating access through audio description to an audiovisual archive that's called the Prison's Memory Archive. And the Prison's Memory Archive holds 175 walk and talk recordings of those who passed through the prison system in Northern Ireland during the conflict that's colloquially known, or rather euphemistically known, as the Troubles. So in addition to the walk and talk recordings, the archive also has a collection of video footage of the Maze and Long Kesh prison, as well as Armagh Jail, which was the women's prison. So for those of you who might be unfamiliar with the name Maze Long Kesh, it was one of the key sites and focal points of the conflict in Northern Ireland, with many important historical events taking place inside of its walls. So for instance, there was internment in 1971, the No Wash protests, the hunger strikes of 1980 and 1981, numerous prison escapes, as well as assassinations. So the prison itself was eventually closed under the terms of the Good Friday Agreement in the early 2000s, and demolition work began on the site in 2006. So while there were hopes that parts of the prison would be retained as part of a newly designed peace centre, these plans were postponed indefinitely amid political disagreements. So with this in mind, the Prison Memories Archive has an extensive collection of footage of the prison site prior to its demolition. So it really serves as an important audiovisual record of the prison, its history and its architecture. And so this project focused on making the built environment of the prison accessible to primarily blind and partially sighted people. That said, its use really extends beyond this group to cover international audiences or people who just are simply interested in the built environment of the prison, its architecture and its history. Through working closely with the RNIB as well as Guide Dogs NI, we've been able to showcase the video tours with audio description to blind and partially sighted people across Northern Ireland. And this was a really important step in the project that gave primary users of audio description, gave them a say in how it's developed, as well as provide them a platform to discuss the legacy of the past in Northern Ireland. So on reflection, and to tie in really with the themes of this event, there are significant challenges in making museums and cultural venues accessible to people and as well safe for people with sight loss. That said, I think that these challenges with these challenges come opportunities. And speaking from my own experience, working on the Prison Memories Archive, digital media can connect us to places through our computer screens, our tablets, our mobile phones. Just like today, for instance, I'm in England and I'm able to connect with all you just through my computer screen. So that said, these websites and digital spaces need to do more in terms of making their content more accessible to people who are blind or partially sighted and have different access needs. And they do this by following good practice in terms of the design of their websites, as well as including audio description or descriptions of their audiovisual content. So here we can really point to legislation such as the Web Accessibility Directive, which came in force in 2018, that builds on existing regulation such as the Equality Act and Disability Discrimination Act in Northern Ireland. And this directive legally requires websites and apps of public sector bodies to make their content more accessible to users with disabilities, including those who are blind and partially sighted. So for instance, there should be text descriptions for images so that users are able to interact with the website without having to use a mouse, which might be difficult for people with disabilities. And it also requires that the information is made available in alternative accessible formats such as large print or audio recordings for people who are blind and partially sighted. So then there's also a requirement for the publication of accessible statements for each website and mobile app, so describe the level of accessibility and indicating any content that isn't accessible. And then finally, there's also this feedback mechanism, which means that people can actually flag any accessibility issues and ask for information that might be inaccessible, to ask for it in an accessible format. However, many public sector websites are still not currently accessible, and mobile apps as well are still not currently accessible. So common problems really include websites that are not easy to use on a mobile or cannot be navigated using, keyboard, or inaccessible PDF format that cannot be read by a screen reader. Also poor color contrast, which make words difficult to read, particularly for partially sighted people. Of course, I'm sure our panelists can talk a little bit more about this in terms of any experiences they've had in terms of accessing websites, particularly museums or any cultural venue websites later in the discussions. But for now, I'd like to pass it back to Xi, and thank you for your attention.
Thanks a lot, Sarah, for your very interesting presentation. And we look forward to watching the audio-described video tour of the Presence Memory Archive. And our next speaker is Olive Rogers from R9B. Olive, would you like to tell us about the work you do?
Good morning, and thank you, Xi and Sarah. My name is Olive Rogers, and I'm the Community Access Worker for the Royal National Institute of Blind and Partially Sighted People, and I'm based here in Belfast. So, accessibility. When service providers hear the words accessibility, they automatically think of ramps, automatic doors, Braille. But accessibility for someone with a sight problem or a sight impairment is much more than that. In fact, it might surprise you that only around 7% of those registered blind in the UK actually read Braille. It's important to remember that blind and partially sighted people don't necessarily look blind. And not all blind and partially sighted people wear dark glasses, have a cane or a guide dog. So it's something to be mindful of, that this might not always be obvious. For someone with a visual impairment, improved accessibility includes looking at what we call the 3 Bs. Firstly, bigger, the use of magnification. Secondly, bolder, the use of colour contrast. And thirdly, brighter, the use of lighting. So for the likes of cultural venues such as museums, heritage sites and art galleries, simply by their nature, they're always going to prove challenging with regards to accessibility for those with a sight impairment. Conservation also has to be considered, which may have to include things like reduced lighting, glass cabinets, etc. So improved access should always be considered at the planning stage of a building or project rather than as an afterthought or as a token gesture. It's much easier to get things right at the planning stage rather than go back and try to adapt or change something that's already built. And this is one of the challenges faced by the likes of outdoor museums and folk parks, where authenticity is part of the nature of the museum, and where accessibility was not something that a farmer thought about in the 18th or 19th century when building a thatched cottage or dwelling. However, much can be done to address some of these challenges. Post-COVID, I regularly took groups of people with a sight impairment to places of interest. And this included Titanic Belfast, the Ulster Museum, the Ulster Folk and Transport Museum, and undoubtedly there were always issues around access. However, I would like to point out at this stage that the staff at these venues were always more than helpful and trying to help as best they could. Summer 2019, we took part in a project with the National Museums NI, and throughout the project, we took every opportunity to highlight some of the access issues to staff and managers. Before we finished the project, the country went into lockdown due to COVID-19 and the museums were closed. So in June 2020, I was approached by the National Museum NI in Belfast and asked to provide some guidance before they reopened to the public as to the provision that they had put in place to manage COVID, and if these provisions would be suitable for those with a sight impairment. I suggested several options. Firstly, that they should consult with the people with sight loss, and secondly, that I should conduct a walkthrough with my colleagues from Guide Dog Association to look at the provisions that they had put in place. The museum welcomed suggestions, and so we started with a walkthrough of all 4 sites associated with the National Museums NI. Firstly, on arrival at the museums, were hygiene measures and hand sanitisers clearly visible? Were they in containers that provided good colour contrast with their surroundings? The signage, arrows in the ground and posters with directions, were the font size suitable? Was there good colour contrast? Was the poster non-reflective of light? How does someone with no sight know where the arrows in the ground are? Where to queue and the use of a one-way system? We support the use of safe tactile indicators or markers, and was this something that could be looked into? Social distancing can be problematic in the new norm. From our research, we found that almost 2/3 of blind or partially sighted people say they found maintaining a social distance difficult. Guide dogs are amazing animals, but they are unaware that social distancing is in place. Not everyone with a sight impairment chooses to use a white cane, so it's not always obvious that they have a sight problem. As a result, the public may sometimes be abusive. We are encouraging our customers to use a cane or have some kind of visual indicator, which includes wearing the sunflower lanyard. And if museum staff think that someone might require assistance, a simple introduction and "Is there anything I can assist you with?" can be a huge help. Before COVID, guiding someone by offering your arm was common practice. Now, due to social distancing, it has become a little more complicated for both parties, and it's not currently an option that we would suggest. Therefore, if someone requires guiding and there's not a safe and comfortable way in which social distancing can be adhered to, verbal guiding may have to be considered. Clear perspex screens at ticket and information and reception areas were hard to see and created unnecessary confusion. So we suggested some kind of markings around the outside to try to make them more visible. Online social media and video content. With the ever-changing landscape, it's vital that the accessibility of these are maintained. And in time of change, good practices can easily be broken, resulting in customers being excluded from important information and updates. During the walk through the museums in question, we also took the opportunity to point out some of the other basic physical features that could be improved upon, such as highlighting steps and looking at labels and signage on boards and display screens, and where lighting might be possibly be improved, being mindful, of course, of the conservation aspect. The second thing we did was to set up focus groups via Zoom so that our customers could discuss their experiences of visiting the museums with representatives from the museum and possibly suggest some solutions. Things the group suggested included an accessible app for audio description, self-guided tours that would read out a lot of the written information on boards and in cabinets, meet and greet by museum volunteers. This included possibly pre-booking a volunteer to be met off a bus or at the front entrance of a guide and guided around the museum. For some of the group, they had the experience of not being able to find the front door of the buildings, something that those of us with sight take for granted. Regular curated handling and information sessions, specifically for those with a sight impairment. With the new norm, possibly information sessions delivered virtually, making sure that the museum website is easily accessible for pre-booking a visit, or that the contact number for pre-booking is clearly obtainable. They also suggested that the museum set up a disability advisory group, meet once or twice a year, made of customers and related organisations. The representatives from the museums took these suggestions and presented them to their board of management at the museum. Some of the suggestions could be acted upon almost immediately, whilst others, such as the development of an app, would take slightly longer to develop. We agreed to run a pilot programme of virtual group talks, and a few weeks ago we ran the first of these when the theme was Takabuki, the Egyptian mummy. Before the sessions took place, everyone who had registered received an envelope in the post with small handling objects relating to the theme. These did not have to be returned to the museum. And following 2 virtual information sessions, each lasting an hour, members of the groups were encouraged to attend the 3rd session, which was a curated visit to the Egyptian gallery at the museum. COVID restrictions applied, and museum staff and volunteers were on hand to assist with meeting and greeting. One blind participant wrote on his evaluation form, "I just wanted to say how excellent the Ulster Museum Mummy project was. The 2 elements, Zoom talks followed by visits, complemented each other well, and the whole thing was thought out in great detail, down to the paperclip on one envelope to distinguish it from another." We are now going to embark on our 2nd series of talks on the Georgians. As this is just a small example of how listening to customers and with a little bit of extra thought and using very little extra resources, adaptations can make a visit to the museum or heritage centre or art gallery more inclusive. We are hopeful that this is the start of a meaningful relationship with the National Museums NI, and as we move forward, other considerations such as tactile routes and further use of technology can enhance the visitor experience. But most importantly, listening to the challenges faced by those with a sight impairment when visiting the venues, taking on board what they are saying and considering some of the solutions that they suggest. Because sometimes it can be as simple as changing the colour or font size or highlighting a set of steps or glass doors can make a visit to the site more enjoyable and encourage those with a disability to revisit with their families and friends. And ultimately, at the end of the day, that's exactly what museums need to do. And encouraging more people of all disabilities and all abilities to visit the museum and make it an enjoyable experience with their family and friends. So thank you for listening to me, and I'm just going to hand back to Xi now.
Thanks, Olive. That was very informative and helpful. And I'm sure many museums can learn from your experience. And we are now moving to the next session, which is the roundtable session. And in this session, we will put some questions to our blind and partially sighted speakers, but also Sarah and Olive. So the first question, I will start to share my screen. So the first question is, when you visited a museum, what was the most enjoyable part of your visit? If there were some museums you have not visited, was there a reason for that? Gareth, would you like to speak first?
Okay, yes. One of the museums that I visited recently was the Belfast Titanic Museum. and that was back in around 2019, and that was whenever we were working on this project, and I had the privilege and opportunity to use one of the audio described devices, which was a bit like a telephone keypad, and you went into various rooms and you pressed various buttons, and it gave you a description of what was in front of you and all around you, and you heard, different, as you went to different parts of the ship, you heard stories within those parts that were relating to where you were, and as well as that, it gave you directions to where you were going as well, which was very handy.
Okay.
And I haven't
Thanks, Gareth.
actually,
Yeah.
I haven't actually visited any other museums since. I was going to visit the one in the Botanic Gardens, but I was quite fearful of that because I didn't know how much it would cost and whether it would be worth the money if it wasn't accessible.
Okay. Thanks, Gareth. You have made several interesting points here. And Tori, would you like to further comments on this question?
Yes, I last visited a museum as part of the Culture Labs project that Olive has mentioned, and that was back in 2019. And I found it really enjoyable, and it was good to learn about something new.
Okay. Thanks. Yes, thanks, Tori. And now we will move to the next question. Now think about what life might be like in the new normal in the future. What challenges do you think blind and partially sighted visitors to museums will experience in the new normal? Do you have any fears about visiting cultural venues? Would you like to take first?
Yes, I think that blind and partially sighted visitors might find it hard knowing if they're going to get guided and how they're going to get guided. And I think that there's also a lot of worry about how to follow the social distancing markers on the floor. I also worry that COVID-19 may be used as not an excuse, but you can't touch an object because of COVID-19, and I think that would exclude people further. I don't have any fears about visiting cultural venues, but it might be easier and people might feel more comfortable attending online rather than visiting in person until COVID has calmed down.
Thanks, Tori. Gareth, would you like to make any further comments?
Well, I would just like to agree with absolutely everything that Tori has said. I have no further comments to make, but I'm in absolute agreement with everything that has been said. So,
thank you, Gareth. So it seems like the touching objects, and we think how we can follow the social distance, and also how can be guided. There will be some problems solved by our blind and partially sighted participants. And the next question is, what access facilities do you think museums could provide in the new normal? For example, giving information in advance. Gareth, would you like to comment this first?
yes, thank you. I think one of the things which I think would be very important would be, for example, if there was a problem with the audio description within the museums, or if it wasn't available at a particular time, if a blind or partially sighted person was to attend a museum on their own, I think it would be good to have the facilities beforehand of being able to book a volunteer. I think one of our colleagues mentioned this earlier on, but I'd been thinking along the same lines of getting a volunteer perhaps to meet them on arrival and help to guide them around the various museums. And of course, the booking online also would be another obviously good alternative, but of course the booking systems would have to be very accessible to screen readers, and of course, you know, obviously it would be very important that the audio descriptions would be available on some sort of an app as well.
Thanks, Gareth. You have made several interesting points here. And Tori, would you like to give any further comments on this?
Yes, I think there should be an option. You should be able to book online or over the phone if you want to, but there should also be an option to attend, you know, unannounced off the street. There is also an app that some venues have installed. Unfortunately, none in Northern Ireland yet, but it's called Welcome by Neatbox, and that can alert museum staff that a person is arriving and what their needs are. So it could be worth installing that to know what they need in advance. And I have no further comments on that.
Okay, thanks, Tori. So it seems like we would like to have volunteers meet us when we are arrival, and when we book tickets online, the booking system should be accessible to the screen readers. And also we should have lanyards or something. We can just, for the museum staff to be aware that the visitors are coming. And our final question is that in the new normal, do you think it would be useful to have a voice-driven museum guide, like some sort of Alexa app on your mobile phone? Tori, would you like to speak first?
Yes, I think it would be useful having that on, you know, like an Alexa app on your mobile phone, but at the same time, I want to enjoy my visit. I don't want to have my phone out all the time. I think a self-guided tour would be good, and the option of having audio guides, you know, audio devices available, so that people don't have to have their phone out all the time, and also for people that don't necessarily have a mobile phone, you know, they need to still be able to access it as well.
Yes, that's a very good point, Tori. Gareth, would you like to make any further comments on this?
Well, I certainly would like to agree with most of the stuff that my colleague said. The only thing that I would add on to it that would, you know, I think that the having an app such as, you know, the something similar to Alexa would be very handy to have, because I totally agree that not everybody wants to have their phone out and wants to be able to enjoy the tour, but yet and all, there might be people who maybe find using other devices quite difficult and maybe are more familiar with their phones, and might be more than happy to use their phones to be able to get them all around. So I think you should have the option of both, really. I think it would be good to have the audio device for those who want to not use their phones, but to keep the Alexa app idea situation for those who maybe feel more comfortable at using their own devices when getting around.
Thank you so much, Gareth. And now we come to Sarah and Olive. Would you like to make any further comments on these questions? So, Sarah, would you like to speak first?
Yeah, thanks, Xi. Yeah, I'd really echo what everyone has said previously. But I'd also like to make the point that the potential of a museum app or a museum guide is also really useful for people who might not know much about the exhibition. They might not necessarily be blind or partially sighted. I think their use can extend beyond this group, you know what I mean? So it can be make it accessible to people who might not usually go to a museum or know about the artwork or the exhibition, and really, you know, get the information that way. So it really has broad appeal. And I think it would be really, for museums, I think they need to start thinking about this now, to really engage with people in terms of the development of these apps or these guides, because you know, these are the people who are going to be using them. So yeah, that's what I'd say for that.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And Olive, would you like to make any further comments?
Yep, I think going forward, the new normal, it's the COVID restrictions are just another layer of challenges for going forward for someone with a sight impairment. I see in the chat room that Nicholas mentioned about the project that happened in the Causeway and Glens area with my colleague Johnny Adams. An excellent project, and there was a book produced at the end of it. It was done before COVID hit in, and it was done with the smaller museums up in the North Coast area. An excellent resource. Where we are now is that we need to then start looking at the COVID side of stuff, and where museums can actually help with that as well. Things like the tactile markings on the ground. It's very well, you know, it's fine putting big arrows in the ground and roping areas off and putting perspex screens up, but if you've got a sight impairment, all those are, for some people, absolutely useless because they can't see. So I think going forward, you know, there is still an awful lot of work needs done here. Some work has been done, but there's still a lot of work still needs to be done to improve accessibility around museums and heritage centres. Yep, so, yep. Work in progress.
Thank you so much, Olive. Thank you.
Sorry, Xi, can I just make a quick point? I'm just looking at the chat here.
Yes, please.
I just see from Ian, he just says, not sure about this idea of voice-driven museum guide for deaf people, as I know myself being one. Text would be more desirable for us. And I totally agree with that point, and I think it's important to raise that point. And that actually reminded me of, there was this app that was created in Poland, and it was for museums, and it had audio description as well as sign language. So it could be used by people who are blind, partially sighted, or deaf or hard of hearing. So that was just an example that could be done in Northern Ireland as well. So I just wanted to make that point, and just to flag that comment, because I think that comment's quite important to raise. So thanks.
Yes, exactly. Thanks, Sarah. I also see this question in the chat as well. I don't not sure about the idea of voice-driven museum guide for deaf people. This is also the thing we are looking at as well. Although like the museum app is for the blind and partially sighted, but voice-driven is just one of the function it's supposed to be. So it should include like sign language and captions and also pictures for the deaf people as well. So it's not only just voice-driven in one app as only one function. It just should be one of the integrated function for blind and partially sighted. They can use voice-driven, but we should also have like sign language, like Sarah said as well. And now I would like to take this opportunity to thank our guest speakers and also our audience who have joined us today. And would anyone like to ask questions or make comments on what has been discussed? You can either type your question or comment using Zoom's chat facility, or you can raise your blue hand and we will ask you to unmute yourself. So now I will go through the chat. Let me see. Nicholas mentioned there's a project under Peace, Causeway Coast and Glens. So Nicholas also gave a link here, and if you're interested in look, you can go for this link. And Aslin asked a question: what are your thoughts on Braille display information, as well as text and audio descriptions? So, Olive, would you like to answer this question first?
Okay. Yep. Braille text. Braille is something that should be offered. Whether it is something that can be put up on display boards, etc. Braille takes up a lot of room, and that is one of the things one of the issues around visiting the likes of the Ulster Museum, for example, where there is a lot of text, and likewise with Titanic Belfast, there is a lot of reading, a lot of text. If you were to try and put all of that in Braille, it would be impossible to put it up on display stands. However, if you had a booklet, a Braille booklet, that would be something else that might solve that, and have it available would solve that issue. I say it is important, and what I would also say to anyone who's thinking of producing Braille is, yep, it's good practice to have copies available. What I would also say would be that if it is a kind of information that is constantly changing, I wouldn't get box loads run off. I would have a number of copies available, and if you need more, then you can reorder. If it's a kind of information that is constantly changing, you could be out an absolute fortune having box loads of Braille copies of stuff that actually is not being required. If you think about going around a museum, people like to talk, to interact, to see things, but the actually trying, so yeah, good practice to have some copies available is what I'm saying. But if you are in charge of a museum or heritage centre, I wouldn't have, say, box loads of it sitting in the corner, because that would cost money, and it's something that a lot of people cannot afford to waste resources like that. But good practice to have a number of copies available is what I would be saying on that one.
Thanks so much, Olive. Now I can see the next question is drawn. Hi, Xi. How does what you have developed differ from the existing audio descriptive guide at Titanic Belfast? I'm interested to hear more about the ability to ask questions and interact. So basically, based on, we lead a several group tour to Titanic Belfast before to kind of evaluate their audio description guide. And their existing audio description guide is a keypad-based audio description guide. So basically, you visit objects or exhibitions, you press number in the keypad, then you will receive an audio description from this keypad. And what we are currently developed is a chatbot prototype for the Titanic Belfast. So basically, we added more functions, such as the visitors can ask help, navigation information, or repeat the audio description. And also they can ask such as more details about one object. And in terms of the free format question, we have a very large database. And when you ask a question, we will try to answer the questions from this big database, such as there's a toilet. Can you tell me more about this exhibition? Can you tell me more about the stories happening on board Titanic? So we kind of try this Q&A database and try to answer questions from the blind and partially sighted visitors in this way. But there are still a lot of things need to be improved, such as the accuracy for recognizing the questions and to answer the right answers. So it's kind of still a lot of things need to be done. The next question is, Olive, I'm interested to hear about the objects sent out to participants as part of the Takabuchi Zun sessions. What were they? How were they chosen? And who funded them to be sent out?
Okay, so our project with the National Museums and I, they were delivering curated talks for us via Zoom. We had 2 sessions via Zoom, and then the third session was a session where you were invited to attend the museum, or they did a Zoom session in the gallery. The object that they sent out before the talks happened, each participant received an envelope. In the envelope was a little bit of a description, a little bit of text for those who had some for partially sighted people in large print format, for those who just a little bit of an introduction. There were also 2 envelopes, one for each of the sessions, and in those first envelope was marked with a paperclip on the top left hand side, so that someone who was blind could distinguish between which envelope was for which session. In the envelopes, we had things like, for the Takabuki session, they had pieces of parchment paper, papyrus paper, with everyone's initial etched into it on a raised surface in hieroglyphics, so that everyone received a personalized little bit of papyrus with their initial and hieroglyphics on it. Everyone received, what else was in that first envelope? Everyone received a little heart-shaped object. There was a little scarab bead, because we were talking about scarabs. There was a white feather. All the objects related to the talks. They were all sanitized before they were sent out, and they were the kind of objects that did not have to be returned to the museum. So the standing joke was that there was going to be a sarcophagus touring Northern Ireland, but that wasn't right, you know. So neighbours' blinds would be twitching, but no, the objects were all the kind of objects that would fit in an envelope, and that they did not have to be returned to the museum. So I don't know if that helps answer the question. Who funded it? Museums funded it, and people had to pre-register for the sessions, because they also had to get the link for the Zoom sessions. Does that answer that question? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thanks, Olive. We have another question for Olive, and then we also see Lisa raise her hands. We will go for this question first and then ask Lisa to unmute herself. So great, thanks, Olive. Are there specific types of lighting that are better in museums? For example, LEDs, target spotlights on displays, or evenly distributed sources?
Okay. One size is not going to fit all. Part of the challenge within a museum setting is that you will have to have galleries that are dark and that there will be pools of light. These can prove very problematic if you have poor vision. Glass cases, you can't see the edge of them. The lights, if you do spotlights, they can be too bright. Ideally, evenly distributed sources of light would solve that. However, from a conservation point of view, and we have to kick in the conservation point of view of museums as well, for some of their objects, different types of lighting have to be considered by the museum as well. So it's trying to get that balance right of trying to get, in certain galleries, you do have to have different types of lighting, but if it is a walk throughout the museum as a whole, evenly distributed sources of lighting are much better. So I don't know if that helps or not. I'd say museums are challenging, simply from the conservation point of view that has to be taken into consideration. Don't know if that helps or not.
Thanks, Olive. Lisa, could you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Yes, hello. I work across a number of different sites through Historic Environment Division, and Carrickfergus Castle would be one of our largest attractions. And actually, we had hoped this year, until COVID struck, to try and make some improvements with accessibility. I'm really interested to hear about that welcome map by Neatbox that Tori mentioned. So thanks for that, Tori. We'll look into that. One of the things I wanted to ask was in terms of guiding. And I realized what Olive was saying, that you can't guide by arm. I'm wondering if something like a hoop could be used. I have guided a visually impaired runner in the past with a small hoop. And I'm wondering how Tori and Gareth feel about that in terms of providing larger hoops. For instance, I know it sounds a bit crazy, but a hula hoop that would have the bigger distance. Some of our sites can be quite dangerous in terms of trips and falls, because of the nature of how they're built. And I think having a physical guide like that would be useful. How would Gareth and Tori feel about that?
I think that that sounds like a good idea in some ways, but again, it would take some getting used to. In fact, you know, I've heard of some people having the idea of one person holding one end of a cane and somebody holding another end of a cane and maybe walking like that. But I personally am not keen on that idea, because physical contact has always been the thing for me. I mean, I have a wee bit of sight and sometimes I can walk beside someone, you know, depending on the area, but I think it would be nice to have something that somebody could hold on to, as long as the object can be flexible enough to be sturdy, not too floppy, but would be sturdy enough to be, for example, you know, I would hold somebody by the elbow usually whenever they're guiding me, and I would have my arm up sort of elbow length, you know, facing upwards. And if you're holding on to a loop or holding on to something, I think, you know, it needs to be at a comfortable height so that the visually impaired person, their arm isn't either hanging away down or else away up in the air. It would have to be something that could be adjusted, I think. But, you know, it sounds like maybe an idea.
Okay.
There's also a device called a ramble tag, which is like it straps onto the upper arm of the guide, and then there's like a little handle that you would hold on to. Now, obviously, it's not 2 meters long, but that could also be a solution, because the longer that something is, I would worry that following it for a start could be hard, and also you could get members of the public going between the guide and the visually impaired person, you know, going between that gap, which could be quite dangerous. For the guiding, could it not work if both of you were wearing masks and you had some sort of a plastic coat, if you like, that could be put on so that it could be taken off then once the guiding was complete, you know, so that someone could hold on to your arm? You know, could that be a solution if, you know, if both people wore masks, and you had some sort of a plastic outer coating, you know, that you could hold on to, that as soon as you were finished guiding, that could be taken off and either thrown in the bin or sanitized? You know, could that be a solution?
It possibly could. We look into that and look into the ramble tag as well. Thanks for that.
You know, even something as simple like a pack-a-mac raincoat, you know, could that be put on for the guide so that the person could hold on to that, and then that could obviously be taken off and sanitized, or, you know, just sort of thinking off the top of my head, you know.
Yeah.
It's Olive here. If I could maybe join the conversation a little bit. Guiding is something that, again, has to be agreeable by both parties as well. If you are going to guide, that both parties are comfortable doing it. Things like face masks, etc., being used. I know that guiding at the moment, we're encouraging people to be in their social bubbles for guiding, but that may not always be doable. I was saying, going forward in the new norm, if you are going to have volunteers involved with meeting and greeting, or staff involved with meeting and greeting, etc. Again, I think it's back down to with the ramble tag. Some people like the ramble tag. It's used in airports, etc. Other people don't like it. It is personal choice again. The one thing I would say about the ramble tag, it's another thing to have to sanitize and make sure it's sanitized well. Whereas if people are just holding someone else's arm, then it is good hand washing. So it's just something else to take into consideration there. As well. I say the social distancing thing is one of the problems at the moment faced with someone with a sight impairment. Again, I mentioned about arrows on the ground and perspex boards and rails, etc. They're all the new challenges that that folk with sight loss have to face nowadays. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Lisa, for your question, and also thanks for the answers from our guest speakers. And also, as Lynn provides more information, Lisa, you can look at in the chat. And thanks so much for the questions and comments. And here's my Twitter account and email address if you have any further questions you'd like to discuss after this event. And finally, I would like to close by referring an article I read in The Guardian by Francis Ryan. As bars, the office, and museums are slowly reopening across the world, it will be easy to go back to business as usual, to forget what society has learned, to abandon the minority now that the majority are catered for. But if we all have to go through this crisis, society may as well make some gains along the way. The new normal could be more accessible than the old. I hope you enjoy a good day. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Xi.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gareth.
Thank you.